manufacturing. She has created criteria for environmentally preferable purchasing, eco labels, product rating systems, as well as local, national, and international chemicals policy reform. In 2008, Dr. Blake worked with the Berkeley Center for Green Chemistry, advising Costco Wholesale, the second largest global retail, in their chemicals management. Dr. Blake's current work focuses on the intersection between climate adaptation, safer materials, and economic equity. Dr. Blake is a member of the Green Ribbon Science Panel, created by the California legislature to advise California EPA on the implementation of California's safer consumer product regulations. And our second speaker is Kavi Reddy. She is a permaculture and design thinker who is constantly actualizing solutions for the benefit of Earth today and in the future. With a degree in interdisciplinary studies field research from UC Berkeley, Kavi's academic curiosity traversed the history of people, money, power, and the solution-oriented practices of business, social entrepreneurship, and regenerative agriculture. Kavi's entrepreneurial experience ranges from co-founding a Y Combinator-backed tech startup to building agriculture supply chain partnerships between independent female permaculture farmers in rural Telangana and the UK-based Lush Cosmetics. Today, Kavi runs a think tank and research group that helps teams identify significant problems, design regenerative business models, and apply a scientific approach to measure social impact. Turns out talking is really hard. And last but most certainly not least, Shreya Ramachandran is a senior at American High School in Fremont. 4 years ago, when she visited the county of Tulare? I think it's Tulare. Saw firsthand the effects of crippling drought. She spoke to people whose wells had run dry, leaving them waterless, and farmers who had lost their year's crops. Shreya traveled to India soon after and found that California is not alone in dealing with drought. People's lands had become unfarmable and whole villages had become abandoned. She was particularly interested in the reuse of gray water, especially from laundry. So she set out to do research on gray water and started her organization, the Gray Water Project. Shreya has won awards like Google Science Fair Top 20 Global Finalists, President's Environmental Youth Award, and 2019's Children's Climate Prize. She now holds the role of Student Commissioner for the Sustainability Commission in Fremont, California. Shreya has proposed to add gray water systems into the 2020 Climate Action Plan and build mandatory gray water pipelines for all new construction in California. Okay, so I'm going to start this panel discussion out with 2 common questions for each speaker. And so for the first question, we'll start with Shreya and then move on to Kavi and then Anne. And my first question is, what led you to your work and how did you get into the work that you do? And if we want to spotlight Shreya.
Thank you so much for that introduction. And I think you touched on it a little bit. I think for me, I became an environmentalist because it was just something that I couldn't ignore. I started out by seeing how water scarcity was really, really affecting people's lives. And once I understood how water issues became interconnected with other environmental challenges, I started to sort of expand my reach outwards and started to work on not just water solutions, but also thinking about how we can reduce food waste and reduce energy consumption and all of these other things. So for me, I became very interested in water conservation, as you mentioned, after seeing firsthand its devastating impacts. But I also think that you can really get involved regardless of like the level of or how much you had originally seen the problem, because these are just sort of global challenges that we're all facing.
Awesome, thank you. And Kavi, I'd like to know how you got started in the work that you do.
Okay, hi everyone. Yep, so for me, it was really a presentation I saw in high school by Alliance for Climate Education. They were a Bay Area based nonprofit, and it was kind of this like animated video that told us what state climate change was in at the moment, what was gonna happen if we didn't do anything about it, and really said, hey, if you're interested to get involved, come talk to us. So I got up and I went and spoke to them, and ACE was creating action teams at schools all around the Bay Area. So we got an action team on our campus, and those projects we started with at my high school, Athenian in Danville, ranged from permaculture projects and other, things around the school. But all of that helped me feel like I don't need to grow up to make a difference, right? Like this is something we can all totally contribute to today. And it helps us pursue this goal of making the world a better place than we, were born into. So that was really the, backing behind what I've tried to pursue ever since.
And I'd like to emphasize that point that you don't have to grow up to make a difference, and showing that our three speakers are kind of at different levels in their environmental career, and how you can impact so many people at such a big level at any stage in your career. And on that note, I'd like to kick the virtual mic over to Anne.
Thanks, Nikki, and thank you everyone for inviting me to be here. So yes, as I think the senior member of this panel, I'm so impressed by my fellow panelists and I'm just delighted to be part of this group. Like Kavi and Shreya, I also have connections to Asia. I grew up in Thailand, Malaysia, and Singapore, and my parents worked in, my father was a labor economist and my mother was a social worker working on issues of industrial workers, women workers in Southeast Asia. And so I think I always grew up thinking that I was the third E of sustainability, that they had the economics and equity and I was bringing the environment piece. But as I went on in my career, I realized that I'm really working at the intersection of those three. And that has created for me both a systemic and global view that I think both of my colleagues on this panel also share. And I suspect many of you do as well because of how you came here. So I studied as a biologist and I got as far as a PhD in biology before realizing that wasn't what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. Toyed a little bit with science journalism and since then have spent a lot of my career translating science for policymakers and other people that need to make decisions about how to work in the environment. So after that, my first job out of graduate school was a hazmat inspector for the state of California, for California EPA, where I tromped around in a hard hat and boots and learned a lot about the economy of California. And this just didn't make sense to me. Like, why were we dumping stuff out smokestacks and pipes? And then I've slowly in the rest of my career moved back up the pipe saying, well, all right, why are we dumping expensive and toxic materials out? That makes no sense. How do we redesign the system to make that work better? So that got me to green chemistry. How do you design products to be safe from the get-go, and to the precautionary principle? Like, do we need these products in the first place? Does it have to be toxic? How do we achieve the function that we want them to achieve without toxicity, without impacting the environment long term? So to me, the regenerative piece is just the next logical evolution of that. How do we build economies where people don't get harmed, where we have safe workplaces, safe communities, safe jobs, safe places that we live and work in, go to school in, and so forth. So that's how I got here.
It's a journey. I also would like to apologize for the blurriness of this slide. I didn't realize that when it got so expanded, it would be blurry. If people are interested in seeing these slides, I'm happy to email them to you if you want to send me a message in the chat, because this one is quite informative. But moving on, in the session introduction, I mentioned that we're in a state of climate emergency and need to rethink and disrupt our materials economy from a linear structure, from extraction to disposal, to more circular systems. Can each of you talk about how your work in building regenerative systems addresses the climate crisis? That being, like, how does a regenerative economy offer solutions for the climate crisis? And I would like to start with Kavi.
Sure. So let me start by explaining permaculture in my mind is this thought of what would a permanent culture be? What are systems we can create that'll work forever, right? For the benefit of us today and for future generations to come. And why is this relevant? Why is this necessary? Well, since the Industrial Revolution, economic growth has heavily been based on fossil fuels and natural resource consumption, or arguably overconsumption, right? So in other words, in the pursuit of money, we've allowed big industries to do a lot of damage to Earth. So to me, if we're talking about being sustainable, we're kind of saying, let's do no more harm. But that doesn't necessarily mean we reverse the damage that was already done. So regenerative thinking is about meeting our human needs while also healing the planet, right? Improving the future of our ecosystems, increasing biodiversity, like going above and beyond and not just being break even, but being better for the future. And I believe my personal work with regenerative businesses as a social entrepreneur is about my belief that if we enable consumers, right, if we enable all of us to start supporting regenerative businesses, then we can actually meet, our human needs, buy everything we need to live while contributing to these businesses that heal our planet for us. And we then all work together, like our economy powers improving our planet, right? And I think it's just a matter of making these solutions available to everybody. And once that happens, we can totally reverse climate change and adopt new lifestyles that are more harmonious with nature. So that's what my work is about.
Love it. It's amazing. And I'd like to move on to Anne. And Anne, if you would like me to re-ask the question, I'm happy to do so.
Why don't you do that so that we have it in our minds?
Yes, of course. Okay, so can each of you talk to me about how your work in building regenerative systems addresses the climate crisis? How does a regenerative economy offer solutions for the climate crisis?
Great. Thank you, Nikki. And I would love to just say everything Kavi said and then some. So how do we take the ideas that Kavi talked about and scale those? And I think the way we do this is we do it the way nature does. Nature doesn't scale by putting a big refinery out in the middle of, out of the country and start digging up oil. How does nature do it? How does nature scale? It does it organically, as you think about it. So how can we build local economies and then do that regionally and then globally? So the work that I'm doing is building on what Kavi says about regenerative businesses. How do we make that into a whole local system? As we've seen in the pandemic, it's become really clear that in order for climate and economic resilience and for equity, we need to localize our food systems. What I work on is relating those food systems also to material systems. So let's think about, we need less stuff. One of our problems in healing the planet is we've made too much stuff, and we've done the take, make, waste approach, the linear approach that Nikki talked about at the beginning. So how do we stop doing that, stop generating waste, and then can we make materials that aren't from, we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but not from petrochemicals, but from potentially from agricultural waste, so that they also contribute to bringing carbon back out of the atmosphere into the soil where we need it. So that's sort of the systems level and then the local level of how the work that I'm focused on right now contributes to improving, healing the planet and changing, stabilizing the climate.
And Shreya, if you'd like to share as well, I'll repeat the question. If you could talk about how your work in building regenerative systems addresses the climate crisis.
Yeah, for sure. So I work mostly with water conservation and gray water reuse. And when thinking about the climate crisis, a lot of people don't think beyond the idea of rising global temperatures and rising sea levels. And one of the largest effects that climate change has is actually in creating more extreme weather patterns. So greater times, greater periods of drought, greater periods of flooding in places where that doesn't usually happen. So doing water conservation and gray water reuse is one way of hopefully combating the problem of global drought and water scarcity. And gray water reuse is an inherently regenerative solution because what is gray water? It's lightly used water from our own homes. It's that lightly used water from sinks, showers, baths, and laundries. It's a resource that we already have in our own homes that we're just letting go to waste. Building off of what Anne and Kavi have said, instead of having that linear type of model where we use water and then it goes down the drain and it's out of our minds, what I'm trying to do is get people to think about how they can reuse that water and recycle it. And it's extremely beneficial because if you're reusing water in your own home, first off, you're reducing your water use. So that's water savings. If you're using less water, then you're also paying less for the water that you consume. And in addition, you're getting less water trucked in, or not trucked in, but less water brought in from really far distances, meaning that you're reducing the energy consumption associated with transporting that water. So what starts out as just water conservation has this sort of ripple effect into other areas of sustainability. And that's at the core of what a regenerative type system does. It does good in a lot of different areas, and it's very beneficial in that regard.
Thank you so much, Shreya. And I also want to point out how different everyone's work is. We have materials like food packaging and goods, and we have water conservation and regenerative agriculture, yet all of these systems are so intertwined and connected. So I'd like to shift into speaker-specific questions. And I'm going to start with Anne. And since your work focuses mainly on safer materials for consumer goods and packaging, this is a two-part question. Why is it important we focus on materials and chemicals used to make them? And in your opinion, what should the future of corporate responsibility look like?
Big questions, and I'm gonna, I could talk about all of those for days, so I'll try to keep it short. So why materials? So as you've heard from my brief history, I've been working on materials, and they're wondering why materials have to be toxic in our manufacturing, and sort of continuing on that theme. And then I started thinking about, well, in the context of climate, we've worked a lot on energy. We've worked for a couple of decades now on renewable energy, but we haven't talked about materials. And materials, like 16 to 20% of petrochemicals, petroleum goes to petrochemical feedstocks, and that's where a lot of our materials come from, including pesticides, fertilizers, industrial solvents, pharmaceuticals, and the scourge that we all know as plastics. And we've actually been so successful with promoting renewable energy that we've sort of freed up cheaper natural gas to make more plastics, and that's why we're seeing this huge enhancement of marine pollution and all the rest of it that we're seeing, with all of its impacts across from extraction through processing that Nikki talked about at the beginning, to impacts on frontline communities in manufacturing, and then at the end of life. Plastics are just, they don't go away, right? By design, they don't go away. So there's something very fundamentally wrong with that system. But right now, there's a huge petrochemical build out happening in the US and around the world, and often in places that have already had the worst impacts in terms of disproportionate impacts on communities, with air pollution and cancer and other. So at the beginning of the Ohio River Valley, in the Pittsburgh area, all the way down to the Houston Ship Channel, where there's a new plastics plant being built. That's the way the oil industry is trying to survive. And we need to that's a much longer discussion, but that's why we need to. So that shift has happened from energy to materials, and we now have the opportunity to find different ways of sourcing our materials that don't do the take, make, waste damage to the planet that our current system does. And I think the second part of your question is, what does corporate responsibility look like? I think we've got some examples already emerging. I'm a B or benefit corporation. Many other businesses are as well. Kavi has the example also of regenerative businesses based in permaculture thinking. There's lots and lots of different examples around the world of how we could do business better. But B corporations, benefit corporations, say that they are responsive to all their stakeholders, not just shareholders. And so we're switching from short-term to long-term thinking globally and systemically about our impacts on the planet. So I think that's the main thing, that corporate social responsibility is not just doing as little harm as possible, but actually starting to be regenerative and healing some of the systems, supply chains, and so forth, that are part of making the things that we use in the world.
And so my next question is touching on what you just talked about and how we can make these materials regenerative, but how you see a path forward to scaling these materials and regenerative systems.
I think one of the things about this comes down to stuff. How do we use stuff, make stuff? What happens to stuff at the end of its life? And I think step one is make less stuff. I mean, the scourge of plastic right now is a lot of unnecessary use, single plastics use. Nikki's nodding, I know, because her business is based very much on this as well. To me, single-use plastics is like an incredibly bad design flaw. I mean, it could not have been worse designed. So step one is make less stuff. Ask if we actually need stuff. Or, some of the arguments about plastic packaging is that we need plastic packaging to get food safely to the end of life. Okay, well, let's rethink the whole delivery system of food. If we localize food, we don't have to do that. If we really need some kind of packaging, maybe we make sure it's not toxic, make sure it's biodegradable. There's also some great advances, particularly in places like Indonesia, of seaweed edible packaging. So let's just rethink how we do all of these systems. And then, yeah, is that enough of an answer that you were looking for, Nikki?
Absolutely, yeah. Yes, and I think that's a perfect segue into Kavi's work. And so, Kavi, I think you can speak more to this. You work specifically and directly on supporting farmers through supply chain partnerships. Can you talk about what a regenerative business model looks like and those supply chain partnerships that are supportive? And a business model that optimizes the triple bottom line of people, profit, and planet.
Absolutely. So maybe I'll start with also mentioning my own company as a design consulting firm is a public benefit C corporation. So by law, we're kind of bound to serve, to promote our customers, aspiring entrepreneurs, investors, other people, to bring to life world benefiting ideas. So it's really cool to say, we do want to take a step into this world of business that today may not be super environmentally just, but we want to do it in a way where our mission as a business, though we're going to make profit, is inherently tied to making the world a better place, right? So that's the first part. To talk directly about my work in supply chain management and with farmers in India. So I had the opportunity to go to the International Permaculture Convergence 2017, which was in India. And it was hosted by Aranya Agricultural Alternatives. And the team there and the work they do with the community is incredible. And my heart really fell in love with the community that the village had, the community that, the organization, the NGO had, not only as thought leaders, helping people learn how to produce food and goods in a way that's good for the planet, but then take it a step further and say, okay, we have a lot of rural farmers we can ask them to practice regenerative agriculture. However, if there is no buyer for the things that they grow, then there's no chance that they're going to continue practicing regenerative farming when they could do a cash crop, potentially use pesticides and fertilizers and make more money. So, in addition to providing all of this knowledge and enabling farmers to practice regenerative agriculture, I was able to come in and with that business acumen and the ability to network, get in contact with Lush Cosmetics, who supports regenerative agriculture all over the world. And so working with Aranya and Lush, we were able to find an existing need, right? A buyer that wants this product. They needed moringa oil, which is high in vitamin E and is great for skincare products. So we found regenerative farmers that do that, and we're able to do all of the business contract stuff to really make that link happen. And then you've enabled these female permaculture farmers with their own source of income. And I can even leave, right? I can move on to something else, but that partnership is made, that link has happened, and now you have this benefit happening to the planet because of it. So that was my work in India. Now I'll quickly talk about the triple bottom line. So we say profit, people, planet. So business, right? A regenerative business is still a business. And so you need to make some profit. Why? Because that enables you to then scale and do more good and really like steal market share from the companies that are doing harm, right? And really take over, disrupt. And we, in regenerative thinking in permaculture, we have these patterns: harvest a yield, right? Plan to get something for yourself, design systems of abundance, prepare to have extra, right? Now let's move on to people. So we want to serve our customers well, make products that are good for them, also enable them to be ethical consumers, right? To have these good businesses to support, enable their waste reduction. So think of something like toothpaste, right? Everyone's probably using toothpaste. It probably comes in a plastic tube. And realistically, most of those toothpastes are like half water, glycerin, or some chalk, right? It's not necessarily things that are good for you. Furthermore, the foaming agents they use and the other stuff are actually extracted in a process that's bad for the environment, and it's not necessarily even good for you as a person. So educating consumers about this and offering them an alternative is one piece. A second piece is your employees or even your suppliers, right? The farmers that you buy from. How are they doing? How's their health, right? Are they using pesticides? Do we need to make sure that we aren't contributing to the pollution of the local water bodies from where we're harvesting our resources? So that's thinking about people, right? And also fair distribution of income, right? Like if we're doing well as a business, really let everybody prosper together, not in an unequal way because I'm a capitalist and I owned it or I started it, right? But really, we just want everyone doing well. And this final piece, planet. So again, like Anna was talking about, the materials in your product, right? What is in it? How is it produced, right? When you dispose of it, how does it impact the environment also? Then the production, the distribution, the extraction, how is that affecting the people in those communities, right? Is the factory that's producing this putting a lot of pollution into the air that's bad for the surrounding community? That's also no good for the planet. And, you know, in this way, if we're thinking about like soil health, water quality, biodiversity, these are now the metrics where we can say, hey, this business is improving these things, right? This business is making the world a better place in these ways. That's the kind of business I want to support. The ones that meet our triple bottom line. Good for people, good for the planet, good for profit as well. Yep, that's all.
So with that, to that point, how do you see that we begin to integrate this regenerative thinking and regenerative understanding and communication with people in our communities so that they can be more aware of the right businesses to support and what's really happening and what's helpful versus what's hurtful.
Yeah, totally. I'm often surprised that people see me as like really radical, or like, oh wow, you've done something so different, so cool. And it surprises me that this isn't more of a norm, even if your main career path, or like your main focus in life isn't necessarily related to environmentalism. There's so many ways that we can make small changes and like small nudges to rethink our culture. So I've been thinking about this with, again, the Athenian School in Danville. So I'll just share some of the things that we are discussing changing. First, I mean, Shreya will get into this more, but watershed management, just think of the questions. Where's our water coming from? What do we add to the water? Where does it go after? How might we improve water quality with our little spot that we have in the bigger watershed of water coming from the mountains and going out to the bay? And the second point, closed loop waste cycles. So, I mean, a forest doesn't produce any waste, right? Everything produced from the earth is able to be cycled back through earth. So on campus, how can we take all of our organic waste and produce our own nutrient-rich soil to then power new growth, grow our own food? And we're even learning by using compost and adding it to build soil fertility, we're able to reduce like the spread of fire. We're able to mitigate the spread of fire and the whole health of the ecosystem. And it can even be things as simple as putting stickers in the bathrooms where we were taking the paper towels that said, these come from trees, right? Or like, turn off the lights when you leave the room. And just simple things to train into our memories that it's possible to like be conscious of our use. It's possible to very gently help everybody else be conscious of their use. And without attacking anybody's practices, just help each other change our lifestyles to be more in tune with our ecosystem. The third point we're talking about are community seed banks. So again, how can we source food locally? How can we save our own seeds? How can we share resources and knowledge across our network to enable others to join in trying new things like growing food at home, right? And all of these other practices that will help us tend towards more regenerative systems. And the final piece I want to speak about is supporting our indigenous community. So Athenian is on traditional Ohlone land, and our experience today was and is tied to that legacy. So by acknowledging the history, we can begin to rethink a new relationship with the indigenous people of our land, with our history, and contribute towards healing. So an example of how we can approach this is working with the Segorite Land Trust, an urban indigenous women-led community organization that facilitates the return of land in the San Francisco Bay Area to indigenous stewardship. So basically, us businesses, residents, organizations can contribute a voluntary annual financial contribution to help these communities buy land to start community gardens, cultural centers, and just have their own space to be sovereign in practicing their culture. So by bringing awareness of this, encouraging our own families to think about this, petitioning our schools and businesses to contribute towards this and make other such changes in our businesses, we can really make it a team effort. And we don't have to take this on alone. We all have each other. We're all going to work together. And I think through that camaraderie and through that like revolution of one, you only have to change your own mind. But then when we do that a whole bunch of times through the whole community, now we have a different culture. Yeah. Back to you, Nikki.
It's so true. And I love what you said also about like how important it is for us to think about our own use. I am always 100% for corporate responsibility. I will always bring that up, but I do think when we look at our own actions, it helps us, like on a micro scale, understand these systems that are much larger, and then we can begin to interact with others in our community and help them. And you never know how planting a seed, how large something can grow. And I'm also, at the end of this discussion, going to link people to Segorite's website. If anyone's interested, I gave a short little presentation in the beginning, and I just think that they are the raddest group of women and community gardens, and it's amazing. So I will connect everyone with their website. But I do want to phase into Shreya and touch back on closed loop systems. And I want to ask you to start, what do you believe the future of water scarcity will look like if water recycling is not a top priority for climate action plans? And two-part question again, what role does student activism play in these changes?
Thank you so much. And yeah, that's a very important thing to consider. And it's not a problem that is approaching, it's a problem that is already here. Already, 2/3 of the world's population lives without access to clean drinking water for at least a month out of the year. That is over a majority of the world's population. So it's not a problem that we have time to think about. It's immediate action that we need, and we need to take steps right now to address this challenge. So if we don't include water scarcity as an issue that we're considering, then we're going to just see this problem get worse and worse. And that's not something that we can afford to happen, because water is the basis of all life. It's something that we all need to survive, and it's the basis on which a lot of our systems are built. Agriculture, our cities are built upon the understanding that we're going to get clean water from somewhere, and we have to make sure we understand that protecting our water resources is a must. It's not an optional in planning for a carbon neutral future, in planning for a more sustainable future. And I believe that student activism and student engagement plays a huge part in these changes. And my nonprofit, the Greywater Project, is really working to make sure that this actually happens. So to facilitate change, you first need to have people understand what the problem is and what they can do about it. And in addition to that, we have to empower people, give them the tools and the potential to actually make changes in their own communities, so we can have a large scale impact beyond just what one person can do. And that's what I'm hoping to do with the Greywater Project. So in order to do education, the Greywater Project does workshops, presentations at schools, library, community, and corporate events, both in the Bay Area and also worldwide. And in addition to that, I've also developed a Greywater curriculum for K through 12 students to teach them about what gray water is, where their water comes from, where it goes, and how they can be environmental stewards and how their actions can actually make a huge difference. So we're teaching people about this issue and how and what their role in it is. And the second part, empowering people to make a difference. I teach people how they can recycle gray water in their own lives. But coming back to youth activism, the Greywater Project is launching a climate ambassador program where young people can learn about climate change, the sustainable development goals, and learn the skills that they need to implement change projects in their own areas, in their own communities. So we're really hoping to elevate the role of students in this and acknowledge that we, the youth, like we're the face of the next generation. If we aren't going to stand up for the future of our planet, then who is going to make that difference? So I believe that this is an extremely, extremely important thing to do.
Awesome. So how can one implement gray water systems in one's own home, and how do you see these practices getting executed citywide or statewide?
Yeah, so you can reuse gray water for a number of things, but the most useful one is reusing gray water for irrigation. And you can do that by building a simple laundry to lawn system, taking the gray water from your laundry machine and putting it out for irrigating your trees or your bushes or your lawn or whatever kind of landscaping that you happen to have. And you can also reuse it for other non-potable uses, such as toilet flushing or other things like that. It's kind of astonishing that we use perfectly clean water to flush our toilets, but there you have it. So those are some of the ways that you can recycle gray water within your own home. And I think these practices can be scaled up very easily and effectively because wastewater is something that is generated from every home, every school, every business. So by reusing that water, you're saving huge amounts of water. And we can incentivize this. We can incentivize this for happening by encouraging governments, local and statewide, to provide rebates for people who want to install gray water systems and encouraging people to take that first step and make those changes in their daily lives. So there's lots of ways that you can do that. And I want to just emphasize that this is not a difficult thing to implement. If you wanted to install a gray water system in your own home, especially a laundry to lawn one, you don't have to pull any type of permit. You generally don't even have to get someone to come in and do a contractor to do construction. It's kind of a DIY system that you can implement. And I've talked a lot about the different programs the Greywater Project is running, from the educational curriculum to the workshops and even the Climate Ambassador program. And I just want to emphasize that these are things that everyone can get involved in, whether you're a young person or if you're a homeowner. There's ways to get involved yeah, with this water revolution, I guess you could call it, and with the Greywater Project. So I might put like contact details in the chat if anyone is interested in getting involved.
It's really quite stunning that our world isn't already set up this way. It's just stunning. So I think we actually have to wrap up in about 2 minutes. Bonnie, do you think we could go to 1:55 or hard stop at 1:50?
1:55 works.
Okay. So I just want to give the audience an opportunity to ask any questions for Q&A for any of the speakers. While you're generating brain questions, I will ask our speakers, so how has the waste and climate crisis been perpetuated by COVID-19? And in what ways do you think we can achieve a circular economy and still be COVID safe? And I'll just throw that up in the air for any of the speakers who would like to respond.
I could go first. This is Kavi again. So yeah, I guess I also just want to say, Shreya and the rest of the youth that are in this, you all are our heroes and role models. And for decades now, young people have been at the front of the fight against climate change, and that's so needed because that energy, that belief, and that enthusiasm is what is gonna get us there. So yeah, all of that. Can you repeat the question? I'm so sorry. It was about COVID-19, right?
Yeah, no, but I just want to.
Okay, so two things. Yeah, one, it sucks that we have so much more disposal, and that being the norm of like single use, throw it away because that's sanitary. At the same time, it's amazing how much I've seen communities rally, being able to say, hey, do any neighbors need help, or any neighbors like immunocompromised, right? And really just saying, we're here, let's start doing, virtual meetings online. Let's start connecting, networking, and talking solutions now. the whole Black Lives Matter movement, right? And remember that it's really about making the world a better place. So it's not just the environmental journey, right? It's all of these platforms and working in communities, working in collaboration with all of our allies of other movements as well. Yeah.
Definitely. Just building off of that, I know that because of COVID-19, environmental action is not the forefront of many people's minds anymore, understandably, because there's so much going on in the world right now. But it's important to constantly keep up that momentum, even if it doesn't seem like the time is perfect or the time is right, because the time is always right for environmental action. It should always be something that is important to you and to other people as well. So keep it in your mind and continue thinking about what ways you can contribute, even if it's a small action, even if it's something you think is almost insignificant. It's not, because it's those little changes in individual behavior that really make up the movement, that really make a difference in the long run.
I would say yes and to all of that. And also, I think one thing that you would probably have gotten clearly from this conversation is how interconnected all these issues are. And what the pandemic has done has made it abundantly clear how we need systemic solutions to all of these issues. So for example, one thing that's become abundantly clear, I'll just take one example, that farm worker exposure has always been an issue. And it's become even more highlighted in as it's become clear that how essential they are and how badly we treat our so-called essential workers, both in healthcare and farm workers and many other places, food production. So, you know, going off what Kavi said, like, where do all these materials come from? Where do they go? How do we change this system so that this is better for everyone? So there's always an environmental component. So I'm thinking, for example, we can now maybe finally start to address the issues of toxic exposure for farm workers to pesticides when we start thinking about redoing our food systems. And then can we do material systems on top of that? You know, can we take transition agricultural waste that right now goes to animal feed and animal bedding or gets burned and turn those into materials instead of using a petrochemical source? So there's lots and lots of opportunities for solutions that are now being highlighted. And they've always been there. The systemic problems have always been there, but it just seems to me that the opportunity here is that people have been able to see the interconnections in the pandemic between our health, how vulnerable our current system makes us, our health, from viruses, but also from the impacts on climate and impacts on environment, and then the inequity of those exposures in the system. So I think that to me has given me hope in this, in otherwise extremely bleak view of the world.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think also connecting with like-minded individuals in events like these is very fulfilling. In these bleak times, it's nice to connect with others who are doing really important work. But I do have to wrap up the session because we all have to meet back up in the main room for closing remarks. And I just wanted to thank our speakers so much for joining us, and thank all of the attendees for spending your Saturday afternoon here. I hope that this was beneficial to you. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to info@Zero Waste Youth USA. And enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, everyone. I have posted the link in the chat to our 2 p.m. closing remarks if you'd like to join us.
I'm going to end the meeting now. Thank you, everyone.